Veteran Salute is sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.
An Oxford native flew for the U.S. Army on 2 tours to Vietnam and then again in Desert Storm.
Gwen Bevel and photojournalist Nicholas Kiefer have his story.
You know you're going into hostile territory when you have a blood ship hidden in your jacket. On silk in several languages it stated, "I'm an American, I do not speak your language, I will not harm you," and then it offered a reward for safe passage to the nearest friendly forces.
Bits and pieces of it is my life.
Bob Hendricks' pieces of the past include this sword and spurs from the time he was attached to a cavalry unit, and the hat still fits.
That's when I realized that I liked the military.
Straight out of basic, he discovered he loved to fly.
You can see so much when you're flying your own aircraft.
This was captured as he was preparing to go to war.
Vietnam was the one where I got shot up the most.
He says one time he pulled up his hand and there was no glove.
When I reached over there and made the turn, a bullet came up through that console, wrapped that metal over so that it hooked my glove, and I came back with an empty hand.
He says sometimes they didn't even realize they had taken enemy fire until they were back on the ground.
Had to have come right between my feet, right across in front of me, and out the top glass like that. So that bullet passed within, that far of me and inches of my feet.
Hendricks distinctly remembers the day they had fired every bullet on the machine when a unit they were supporting on the ground got into a major firefight.
The situation dictator had wounded soldiers. I had an aircraft.
Hendricks earned this Distinguished Flying Cross for his bravery and a call that saved those soldiers' lives.
We will take them out. So we landed, picked them up, medevaced them.
Hendricks went on to fly far more troops and equipment all over Vietnam when he volunteered for a second tour.
That's war. You respond and you do things.
Hendricks later took that love for adrenaline and his talents to the U.S. Forest Service.
I didn't realize what it was until I got into the Forest Service and was fighting fires. Now I'm feeling good and I'm happy again. Well, it's that adrenaline.
He also met his true happy while firefighting, his wife Annie, a Navy veteran who was at the time the secretary of the Regional Forester's Office.
She would know some of the missions that I was going to go on for the Forest Service before I knew.
They both soon figured out his deployment days were not done.
Desert Storm, occupational medal.
Hendricks flew more missions in Desert Storm.
Sole purpose of our unit was to medevac for Americans, not the locals.
He says that was until they got a call about some survivors following one of Saddam Hussein's many Imperial Guard attacks.
We had a mother who was carrying a baby and she had been shot. She was wounded. She had a rope tied around her and pulling her daughter. I think she was about an 11-year-old girl, and she had been shot. And she was quite serious.
Hendricks says he did what he was known to do.
I loaded him up and we medevaced him to the hospital.
When it was time for Hendricks to finally head home from war for good, an inspiring artist on his crew made sure his aircraft was ready, and his 2 young sons were so thankful to have their hero home.
They were in that environment, and I think they enjoyed it very much. That might have influenced them a little bit.
Years later, his son, who is military police.
He was one of Hussein's handlers during the time he was tried. And he has tons of stories about that.
His other son is an artillery officer. The 2 have deployed 5 times, making their retired chief warrant officer father very proud.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hendricks says he doesn't regret one day he took flight in the more than 3 decades he flew for the Army. Hendricks says when he was young and gung-ho, he flew gunships. Then later, decades later, at the end of his career, he chose a medevac unit. He says that way he was close to the doctors and nurses just in case he needed them. Here for you, Gwen Bevel, KSN News 3.
On behalf of Devon James Injury Lawyers, we're honored to be here with this week's Veteran of the Week, Bob Hendricks. Bob was a pilot in the U.S. Army and flew missions not only in Vietnam, but also in Desert Storm. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. This is quite an honor to receive, a recognition like this, and I can say I've enjoyed every day of my 31 years in the Army.
Veteran Salute is sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.